Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of I Should Be Painting. As many of you may know, we've been working on our Slow Grow campaign, and as part of that, I have been 3D printing some models for Josh. So today, I thought I would take a very short, very quick dive into 5 tips from me about getting into 3D resin printing. Don't forget that if we reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of May 2021, we will be giving away the Piety and Pain, the Eldar Codex, and the dice to one lucky winner from our Discord channel. So if you are not subscribed, you should subscribe now and join our Discord channel. Both of those links will be down below. In a couple weeks, I'm going to start the process of documenting and explaining what it actually takes for you to resin 3D print an entire playable army. But right now, I thought I would go over just some tips that I have learned over the past few years of doing this to help you on your adventure. As many of you may know, resin printing has been one of the more difficult areas of 3D printing to get into. The printers were very expensive for a very long time, and even though they gave extremely great resolution, the idea of spending $3,000 to $5,000 on a printer in order to make miniatures just was not within anybody's reach. But now, with the new LCD technology, there's a whole host of companies that have come out with resin printers that are reasonably priced, and getting into the hobby of 3D printing your own hobby miniatures is much, much more affordable. That being said, as somebody who has been resin printing since 2016, there are 5 things that I would like to talk about, whether or not you are already printing or if you're thinking about printing. The first is whether or not you are going to be generating your own 3D files, meaning are you getting into this because you want to design something in your head and you have the skills and the ability to do that, and you're going to be making your own model and then 3D printing it, or are you going to be looking for models either to purchase from 3D artists or for free from things like Thingiverse and then printing them from there? And if you're going to be in the category of not making things yourself, then what you need to be aware of is just having the model is only the first step. There's something called supports, and everything that you print on these resin printers needs supports. And oftentimes when you get models, they either don't come with supports or you have to generate the supports yourself. If you can, it is really great to try and find models where the designer of the model themselves have already pre-designed the supports that they feel work best with their. However, I recently ran into a situation where the supports that came with the 3D files that we purchased did not work well with my printer. The problem was that the support did not have what's called rafting, or a bowing of the bottom support, so they were extremely difficult to get off of my print bed, which means I had some bad prints, I had some wasted time, and overall I had to go back and redo all of the supports. Now fortunately, I'm using pretty good software because I'm running the Formlabs 2, which has really good software associated with it, and I can easily generate good supports that we know are going to work. If you are using other products, making your own supports can actually be quite tedious. So that is just something to be aware of. If you are just getting into resin printing and you are not making your own files because you are not a 3D artist, my recommendation is to find files that come pre-supported. Another thing to note is that if you are somebody who's interested in 3D printing because you want to make a bust or a ship or just one thing, that's very different than trying to SLA print or resin print an entire army. And oftentimes in our hobby, the armies require different loadouts for each miniature. So you might think, okay, well, I'm just gonna print these 10 guys, but these 10 guys may also need different faces, different backpacks, different hands, different feet, different loadouts, and what seems like an easy task of just printing 10 models winds up being a really difficult task of printing 40 to 50 individual items just to make a squad of 10 people. So let's think about that. For example, if you have a unit of 10 whatever, and all of them have no left hand, no right hand, and no head, That is 40 prints to do 10 guys. And this brings us into project and file management. Once you find all of these different files that you are purchasing from reputable people who have spent a lot of time designing and building their own 3D models, you then need to keep track of everything. Just printing one thing out and painting it up, sure, not a big deal. But now that you're going to be printing an entire army or thinking about printing an entire army, you are going to need to keep yourself organized. I currently do that simply through a Google Sheet, but even on that sheet, in order to work on this portion of Josh's army, which isn't even his entire army, just a portion of it, it's so far 534 individual prints, all of them need to be tracked. Need to make sure that they get categorized correctly. Need to make sure that they stay together properly. I need to make sure that I have the appropriate STL files, the appropriate print files. It can get very, very out of control very quickly if you do not keep yourself organized. Next, if you have a resin printer or you don't have a resin printer, something that you need to know is that these machines are not turnkey and turn it on, walk away, leave it, you're done. Even my Formlabs, which is one of the more higher end models that you can buy, requires maintenance. There are printer breakdowns, there are internal component breakdowns, there are resin spills. Something in 3D printing is always going to go wrong. And what you thought was going to take you a couple of hours just to print something winds up taking you all day. For example, on my Formlabs, there is an emergency resin overflow trap. Now, anytime any resin gets out of the tank, whether it's because the machine itself made an error or I made an error loading resin, it has a reservoir that goes around the edge and it goes into a little cup. Unfortunately, that little cup, once it fills up, then goes into the machine, which means that I was not aware of that, but I had that scenario happen, and so instead of spending one day printing, I actually had to spend one day contacting customer support, finding out whether or not I was going to void my warranty by opening the machine, making sure that the machine still worked, taking the side pieces off, removing the resin, verifying that everything worked, putting it back together, running the calibration, and making sure that my machine was still working. And I'm just going to be honest with you, between the 4 different printers that I've had, 1 resin and 3 regular 3D printers, these sorts of objects, these things that you're buying, are very hands-on. If your expectation is just to plug and play and have it work every single time without needing to fuss with it, that's not the case. 3D printing itself is its own hobby on top of the hobby that you are 3D printing for. And that, of course, leads into our last thing, which is expect both cost and time overflows. The fact is, if you are going to try and print an entire army, or if you're going to be 3D printing a lot of things, most likely it's going to cost you more money, either in actual dollars, or it's going to cost you a lot more time. A great example is, for these models that I am setting up for Josh, I had to redo all of the supports, and that took me about 5 to 10 hours of working on my computer, printing out models, making sure that the supports worked, having them fail, trying it again. I finally got it set up and ready to go. Now that's great because I'm going to be printing Josh 50 of them, so that was time well worth it. But if your plan was only to print 10, well, now you just spent 10 hours printing 10 models, and you have to ask yourself, how valuable is my time? Also, in regards to cost, you need to know that resin is icky. It's yucky, it's gross, it requires setup. If it gets on your carpet, it will destroy your carpet. If it gets on your hands, it can give you skin irritation. Dealing with resin is not fun, and you need to have a very, very well set up and well thought out workflow if you are going to resin print yourself. There are lots of videos. You can go to Tested, you can go to Goobertown, you can look at all sorts of people who are showing these videos, and what you will see is that they have very precise setups. They wear gloves, they wear safety glasses. Dealing with isopropyl alcohol and resin and these, either LCD or laser printers requires not only the investment but also in the time and keeping yourself and your environment clean. And that is a cost in and of itself. So if you're thinking about getting into resin printing, I think it's a great idea. It's a fun addition to the hobby. If you are already sort of stressed out enough as it is with your pile of shame, then maybe 3D printing more models isn't quite for you. Know that 3D printing in and of itself is its own hobby, and I am going to be going into that in much more detail later on this summer when I 3D print a 2,000 point army from start to finish. I'm going to show you where I get the files, what I do with the files, what it's actually like to print the files, all of the different settings that I'm going to change, how I set up my workflow, how I deal with the chemicals. I'm going to take you through all of it. But for now, I hope that this has given you a little bit of an insight into the negatives and maybe some of the positives of 3D resin printing. Let's take a look at our featured creators this week. Okay, let's take a look at our 3 featured artists this week. We are staying mostly on Instagram, although we are venturing over into Facebook for a minute. First place we are going is KingsCorner Painting. As always, we will give it an immediate follow. And what drew me here was a post from Facebook, this atmospheric photo. I just thought this was a absolutely beautiful, beautiful terrain shot. Obviously, I mean, you could consider these statues miniatures, but there are no particular miniatures that are present. There's not a particular scene that's going on, but what we are looking at is a very, very well crafted, more like a painting rather than a photograph. But I think this is absolutely gorgeous. It's so thematic, everything blends really well into each other. You can tell that the paint jobs themselves are extremely well done. And overall, I thought that this was just a very, very unique photo to see. I mean, we don't always, but we often see photos of miniatures and even miniatures in thematic poses, but just creating kind of a landscape. I haven't seen many photos of just landscapes, and so I thought that this would be a really fun thing to share. And apparently 1,215 other people also thought so. So check out King's Corner on Instagram. The link will be down below for everybody. Next up is Tompaintsmodles, and once again we will give him a follow as well. Tom has this so wonderfully done Magnito. My goodness. First of all, Magnito is one of my most all-time favorite villains of all of the villains. Yeah, I think he's my favorite. I think he's just absolutely my favorite. In the movies, in the comic books, and the TV shows, I've always gravitated towards Magnito as one of my favorite villains. And this paint job is particularly epic. You can tell it's epic because just look at the detail that went into the rebar. I mean, just the rebar alone is absolutely gorgeous with its highlighting and its shadows, the blending on the capes, these artificial shadows that he's created and put in, the slight rust coming in over here. And he is also was nice enough to send us some detail photos just for us to take a look at, so we can take a look at the back of the model. I mean, it's gorgeous. Look at this edge highlight. Look how clean and precise these lines are. Like, it's been painted immaculately. Also, the blue with some OSL in the eyes coming out onto his helmet, absolutely gorgeous. The rust effect on the inside of the rubble and the cracks. I mean, it's a really, really beautiful model. And I also very much appreciate you sharing some high resolution photos for me to share with everybody. Thank you so much. Y'all should subscribe to Tompaintsmodles. Again, it will be down below. Lastly, we are going over to Facebook and we are looking at 6 minis. And this one I picked because I think this is a really, really special miniature. This is a special miniature to me, not just because of technique or because it looks really good. This is a special miniature to me because it is a diorama with one model on a base. I mean, by creating this blast hole, you know, through the dreadnought and ripping off the arm and putting the skull down and having this bird, the environment that 6 is able to create in just this one model is absolutely staggering. I mean, there is an entire storyline with this model, right? It's not just a well-painted dreadnought in a jungle with a pretty bird. No, this is a dreadnought that got its, it got, I don't know, a las cannon got blown through it, its arm got ripped off, it's been sitting there for a long time, its paint is starting to crack and rust, you know what I mean? We have the remnants, the skull, the battle that was going on. We have this bird that's just sort of sitting on it, which implies that it doesn't really move and that the nature has become accustomed to it. It is a relic of a war, and it has lost its battle, and it is a single miniature. A single miniature on a base. We're not talking about a diorama. We're not talking about, an army. We're not talking about anything other than just modifying a single miniature and creating a static scene that tells a story. And for that reason, I truly love this model. So you should go ahead and check out 66 Miniatures on Facebook. Once again, that link will be down below. All 3 creators this week, fantastic artists. I love seeing what's coming out. Thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode of I Should Be Painting. And if you are a resin 3D printer, I would love to hear your comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Are there other things that I should have talked about? Or did I exaggerate some of the things that I talked about? We would love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to take your patronage to the next level, check out our Patreon in the notes below. And as always, this is Aaron from CGN, and we'll see you on the table.